So, looking forward to 2024 and beyond, and we'll look on the negative side first of all. What is your biggest cause for concern? I'm going to kick off this one with Alex.
Yeah, I think the biggest risk, which is still the same, if you'd have asked me sort of 12 months ago, is a potential for a US recession. Clearly, it was very well predicted that we would be in there would be a recession in the US this year, this time last year, and that hasn't arrived. But in many ways, it's a bit more dangerous now, and that because it was widely predicted, people were the sort of cyclical stocks were very cheap. Whereas because the recession hasn't arrived, there's increasing calls for a soft landing, which certainly could happen. But when you look at historic periods where interest rates have risen this fast and by this much, it's extremely rare for a recession not to occur. And I think, given the US weights in global GDP and its linkages through the rest of the globe, that has to be the biggest risk for equities and assets in general for this year, a US recession.
Thanks very much, Alex. Emily, what's your biggest cause for concern?
Yeah, thank you, Annabelle. I mean, I agree with Alex, but actually, I actually also think that the opposite could be quite a big risk, which is that we don't see any slowdown at all in the US, and the labour market remains very, very tight, and we actually return to inflation rising on the back of that very strong demand, and we don't get rate cuts that people are starting to factor in. So I think that's also could be quite a risk, especially for the smaller markets, which would keep the cost of capital very high for frontier countries. But I think I, of course, have to throw out there that big escalations in some of the global conflicts that we've seen this year wouldn't be my central case at all. But if we were to see that, and it would really substantially escalate, I think that would be global risk as well.
Thank you. So we've got a possibility of a recession and not having a recession being a concern. James, what do you think?
Well, that's what I just love about financial markets, isn't it? You've got two experts with two equally valid views in my view. Yeah, it is quite finely balanced, and so I'm going to throw in that probably one of the key risks will be a risk of a policy mistake, because it is quite finely balanced, and central bankers around the world are going to have to tread this quite narrow path between trying to identify whether their economies are growing sufficiently, or whether inflation is a concern. So that would be one. Although I'm not a big believer in politics feeding into financial markets, there are clearly risks of escalation in conflicts around the world, and the other one for me is a big risk is the US election. It would be absolutely wonderful if the US electorate could sit there at the beginning of next year and be confident that the two leading candidates might actually get to the polling day. Because at the moment, there is a possibility that both or either might be incapacitated, one through being locked up and the other one maybe not being fit enough to stand. So, it'd be wonderful if the US could come up with a couple of politicians who were viable in the long run.
Okay, well, at least we've got politicians, I hope, that are viable in the long run here in the UK. But that's a fair risk for sure.